My name's Ron Kagan. I'm the CEO and Director of the Zoological Society. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Center for Zoo Animal Welfare Public Lecture Series. The mission of the Zoological Society's Center for Zoo Animal Welfare is to advance captive exotic animal welfare science and policy to help ensure that animals in zoos and aquariums are thriving. Right now, more than 140 world experts in animal welfare are here at the zoo for the next 3 days for the International Animal Welfare Congress. This Congress will address the ethical dimensions and global commitment to zoo and aquarium animal welfare and is unprecedented in its gathering. So I said there are 140 leaders. This evening, I'm pleased to introduce one leader who's also a luminary, Dr. Carl Safina, president of the Safina Center. Dr. Safina earned his PhD in ecology at Rutgers, and in the 1990s, he brought fisheries issues to the environmental mainstream. He led campaigns to ban high seas drift nets, to rewrite U.S. federal fisheries laws, to work toward international conservation of tunas, sharks, and other fishes, and to achieve passage of a United Nations Global Fisheries Treaty. He's now the first endowed professor for nature and humanity, it's an awesome title, at Stony Brook University, where he co-chairs the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science and runs the nonprofit Safina Center. He hosted the PBS series, Saving the Ocean, and his writing appears in publications such as the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Huffington Post, to name just a few. He's author of numerous books, including Song for the Blue Ocean, and Carl's 7th book is Beyond Words, What Animals Think and Feel. After Carl gives his presentation, we'll entertain a few questions, and then for those of you that would like to have him sign your books, we will do that just outside. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Carl Safina.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for coming. It's very exciting to be here. This is a fantastic place. I have never been here before, but it's really been great, and I've had a very nice last few hours seeing a little bit of the zoo and talking about some really interesting topics that have to do with animals and conservation and things like that. And tonight we're going to start with a question. You're going to have to tell me how many of you have ever asked yourself the following question. Does my dog really love me, or does she just want a treat? How many people have asked themselves that question? Okay. I thought so. Well, I think it's easy to say, just by looking at them, it's easy to say, of course they really love us. It's easy to see what's going on in that furry little head just by looking at them, right? All right, maybe it's not so easy to know what's going on in those furry little heads. But something's going on. You can't tell me nothing's going on. And then there's another thing, which is, how come our first question is, do they love us? Why is our question about them really about us? Why is it that all we're really interested in is me? Why are we such narcissists? How can we ever get to know anything or anybody if the main thing we want to know is about us? And are we loved? So I needed a different question. And the question I came up with was, who are you? Who are you is a very different question than, do you love me? Now maybe a door is opening. There are capacities of the human mind. We have them. Are we the only ones that have them? What are these other creatures on this planet with us doing with some very big brains? Is it possible that nothing is going on in there? I don't think so. But how can we find out? How can we look? For decades, scientists said, you can't hope to know. So it can't be a scientific question. But I, as a scientist, disagree with that. I think there are some very good ways in. You can look at the brain. You can consider evolution. You can watch what they're doing. So that is Joyce Poole. Joyce Poole is a very famous elephant researcher, and that is not an elephant. That is a big jellyfish. Why do I have an elephant researcher with a jellyfish? Well, for one thing, she sent me that picture, and for the other thing, jellyfish were the first creatures that had nerve cells. And then jellies eventually gave rise to chordates, and chordates gave rise to vertebrates. Vertebrates came out of the ocean and built universities and zoos and things like that, wrote books. But it is still true that a nerve cell is basically the same thing, whether it's in a jellyfish or a dog or a macaw or a crayfish. So what does that, if we all have the same kind of nerve cells pretty much, what does that tell us about the inner life of a crayfish? The fact that we have nerve cells and they have nerve cells, does that tell us anything? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't really tell us anything. But it turns out that if you have a crayfish in a tank and you keep giving it little tiny electrical shocks every time it starts to come out and explore, it will develop what looks like an anxiety disorder. It will stop coming out. It will act like it's afraid to come out. But if you put the same drug used to treat anxiety disorder in people in the water, the crayfish will relax again and come out and start exploring again. That's interesting to me. Now, how do we honor the possibility of crayfish anxiety? Mostly we boil them by the thousands. An octopus is a mollusk. It's not even a vertebrate. It's a mollusk. And it recognizes different human faces as well as do most apes. And it uses tools as well as do most apes. How do we recognize and honor the ape-like intelligence of this extraordinary mollusk? Mostly we boil them, too. There are fish on reefs called groupers, and some groupers, if they chase a prey fish into a crevice in the coral or the rocks, they have a way of going to, they know where a moray eel might be sleeping often. If they know where a moray eel is sleeping, they go and they have a way of signaling to the moray, follow me. And the moray understands that signal and often will follow the grouper. And then the grouper has a different signal that says, it's here. And the moray will go in, and sometimes the moray will grab the fish. And sometimes the fish will come out and the grouper will get it. So it doesn't work for either one every time, but over time it works for both of them. This is an ancient partnership that is probably millions of years old, and humans have only known about it for about 15 years. And when I say humans have only known about it, I mean the 16 people who read that paper. But how do we honor this ancient interspecies partnership. Interspecies partnerships are pretty unusual. How do we honor this ancient interspecies partnership? What do you think? It's not boiled, it's fried. Now, the thing is, a pattern is emerging, but that pattern says more about us than it says about them. Teaching is something that we do in schools and at universities and at zoos. Teaching is when you take time away from what you're doing to show your companion how to do something. You may learn by watching, but unless the one you're watching is taking time away from what it's doing, it's not actually teaching. Turns out chimpanzees do not teach, but sea otters do teach. Killer whales teach a lot. They do some very extensive, very long-term teaching, and killer whales also share almost all the food that they catch. If you look at the mouse brain and you look at a human brain, what you see is that the human brain is basically an elaborated mouse brain. The mouse has sort of a simpler mammalian brain, not sort of, I don't want to offend any mice here, but it has a simple mammalian brain. We have a more complicated mammalian brain, and that's the way evolution works. Evolution takes something that is already in stock, parts off the shelf, and then fabricates a new twist. So if you look at the human brain compared to a chimpanzee brain, what you see is two pretty elaborate brains. The human brain is bigger. Basically, we have a pretty big chimpanzee brain. That's a good thing because we are the most insecure of all of the apes. But uh-oh, that's a dolphin. What in the world do dolphins do with a brain that is bigger and more complicated than ours? Does that mean that they are much more intelligent than we are? I don't know, because it might mean that they are using most of that brain and need a big complicated brain to analyze sonar. That's possible. The thing is, you can see brains and you can't see minds. But you can see the workings of minds in the logic of behaviors. So let's look at the workings of the mind of elephants. You understand this picture exactly as the elephants understand what they're doing. Because what you clearly see is that the elephants have found a patch of shade in the coolness under the palm trees, and they've chosen that spot to let their babies go to sleep, while the adults rest but don't sleep. They remain vigilant, facing out and touching one another. That doesn't have to be explained in tremendous detail because you understand exactly what's going on, exactly how they understand what's going on. On the same plains in Africa, under the arc of the same sun, listening to the roars and the whoops of the same enemies, our minds became the minds we have, and their minds became the minds they have. We've been neighbors for a very long time, and we have a lot in common. It's obvious that they're relaxed. It's obvious that they are not relaxed. They're concerned. What are elephants concerned about? Some very interesting experiments have been done where researchers recorded people in different languages, specifically English and Maasai, saying, "Oh, look, there are some elephants." They said the same thing in those languages. And then the researchers replayed the recordings through a speaker hidden in some bushes. So there was no scent, there was just the sound of it. And when the elephants heard English, they did nothing, because English speakers are tourists, and tourists don't bother elephants. But when they heard the Maasai voices, they bunched up and run away. They run away from the Maasai because the Maasai carry spears, and they sometimes get into confrontations with elephants at waterholes, and elephants get hurt that way and sometimes killed. The elephants know not only that there are different kinds of animals in the world, and some of them are people. They know that there are different kinds of people, and some of them are just fine and others are dangerous. They have been observing us more closely and better than we have been observing them. Under the skin, mammals are almost completely identical. We have the same skeletons. Even in the front flipper of a whale, there are 5 fingers with the same bones. We have the same organs. We have the same nervous systems. We have the same needs. Find food, stay alive, try to keep your children alive. It's the same imperative whether outwardly you're outfitted for hiking or for diving. Under the skin, we are all close kin. And so we see things like helping when help is needed. We see curiosity, mainly in the young, as they explore the world. We see the deep bonds of family affection. And not just mammals, other animals too. Courtship is courtship. Dancing is dancing. It looks pretty similar because it's pretty similar. And then we ask a really weird question. We still ask this question: are they conscious? Why in the world are we still wondering about it? Now, many people have had total anesthesia. In total anesthesia, what happens to you? You become unconscious. It means you have no experience from your sensory organs. When you come out of anesthesia, you get reconnected to your sense organs and you start having sensory experiences. That's what consciousness is. Consciousness is the thing that feels like something. Why in the world would we wonder whether animals that have eyes and can see, and noses and can smell, tongues that can lick, ears that can hear, who play with each other, why are we still asking, are they conscious? This strikes me as very, very strange. Yes, they're conscious. If you read a lot about animal behavior, like you have to do if you're going to write a whole book about animal behavior, you come across a thing that I started to think of as a Mad Libs line about animal behavior and humans. And the Mad Lib line goes basically, blank makes us human. And different people insist it's one thing or another thing because they're trying to get the credit for having the idea about what makes us human. So ego is part of what makes us human. But one of the things that they say makes us human is empathy. Empathy makes us human. Well, empathy is just the ability of your mind to match the mood of your companions. Empathy turns out to be not the thing that makes us human, but one of the most common things in animal behavior in the world. Because if you live with others, if you are a group living animal, you have to be able to match moods with your companions. If it's time to hurry, you need to hurry. It doesn't work to be on a beach with 300 or 400 other companions of yours and suddenly everybody startle and fly away and you stand on the beach saying, well, I wonder why they just all left. So the oldest kind of empathy is contagious fear. And boy, do we still have it. The way I think about empathy is I think about it as a sliding scale of different things that grade into each other. There's what I call basic empathy, the mood matching I talked about. There's what I call sympathy, a little bit farther removed. You don't feel the same emotion, but you understand it. I'm sorry to hear that your great-grandmother has just passed away. That is sympathy. If you are moved to act on your sympathy, to try to help out, that's what I call compassion. Human empathy, it's a good thing, but it's far from perfect. We round up other empathic creatures, and then we kill them, and then we eat them. And maybe a lot of you are thinking, but those are other species. We're partly predators, that's just predation. But we don't treat each other so well either. It seems often that people who know only one thing about animal behavior know one very awkward word called anthropomorphism. And they know that you must never do this thing, which is to attribute thoughts and emotional experiences to non-human people. This is against the rules. But science is not supposed to have rules. Science is supposed to be curious and describe what actually is. So isn't it unscientific to say they're hungry when they're hunting and killing things, to say they're exhausted when their tongues are hanging out, and then when they are having a good time and playing with their parents and their children, say, oh, I have no idea if they could actually be experiencing any emotions? That is not scientific. Now, I was telling all of this to a reporter who was interviewing me about my book when it just came out, and she said, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but how do you actually know that other animals actually can think and feel? And I thought about the 600 references at the back of the book, and I was trying to think, what's the best study I can cite? And then I realized that the answer was right on the rug. Because when my little dog, not so little, but when she comes over to me, she comes off the rug and she comes over to me and she rolls over on her back. Now, first of all, she doesn't go over to the sofa and roll over on her back, and she doesn't go over to the dining room table and roll over on her back. She comes over to me and she rolls over on her back. And why does she do that? Because she's just had a thought. And the thought is, hey, I'd like my belly rubbed. And I know we're family. And I know I can be completely exposed and completely vulnerable because I totally trust you. And I know that if I roll over on my back, you'll know exactly what I'm asking for. And I know that you know how to do it and make it feel good. So she has just had a thought, and she has just felt. And it's not really too much more complicated than that. When we see other animals, we slap labels on them. We say, oh, killer whales, oh, wolves, oh, elephants. That's not how they see each other, though. That tall-finned male, when I took this picture, he was 36 years old. So he's 39 now. And the female next to him is 45 years old. They know exactly who they are because they have known each other for decades. They have traveled thousands of miles together. When they are separated in ocean water that has a visibility of about 30 feet, they can hear each other from 10 miles away and know how to get back together. They know the places that they've been. They know where they range. They know what to do in different seasons. They have lives. And they are individuals who know who they are and what their lives are about. This is an elephant named Philo. Elephants live in female groups led by a female matriarch with her daughters and their babies. And when the male babies get to be adolescents, they leave. And Philo is at that stage where he had left, and in this picture you can see him feeling a little bit of sort of adolescent male swagger. And this is Philo 4 days later. We don't only feel grief. Humans generate an incredible amount of it. We want to carve their teeth. Why can't we wait for them to die? They'd all have bigger teeth if we waited for them to die. In Roman times, elephants lived in Africa from the Mediterranean Sea to the Cape of Good Hope. And when I was a young man, I went to Africa for the first time, they still lived in vast, continuous swaths of Central and East Africa. And now they live in tiny, shrinking, disconnected shards. This is the geography of the greatest animal on land being driven extinct, annihilated, so we can carve their teeth. Talk about empathy. Of course, in this country, we take much better care of our own wildlife. In Yellowstone National Park, which has been called America's best idea, we hired park rangers to kill every single wolf until they were completely exterminated, not only there, but basically south of Canada. And then after 60 years and 20 years of fighting, there were so many deer and elk eating so much of the vegetation that people finally won the battle to bring some wolves back into Yellowstone. And that has happened, and Yellowstone is the best place in the world to see free-living wolves. And people spend millions. An almost unimaginable number has been calculated, $30 million of visitors going to Yellowstone just specifically to see wolves every year. And it's pretty fantastic. And when I was there, I was watching this one particular family. A wolf pack is a nuclear family. There are usually just a mother and a father, 2 breeding adults. Occasionally there's another adult in there, maybe the brother of the breeding male, perhaps, and then their offspring of several seasons. When the offspring get to be adolescents, they leave to try to find their own stake in the world. So it's very, very similar to human nuclear families, which is why domesticated wolves, which we call dogs, are the ones who are lying around in our house because they know how to live in a nuclear family. From millions of years of evolutionary experience, they know how to do that. It's why we don't have chimpanzees who, if they could get along, would probably be more useful because they have hands. You could tell them to do more stuff, but they won't because they don't know how to live like that, but wolves do. Wolves know how to live in nuclear families. So this one family was the most watched, the most famous. The mother in that family was by far the most famous wolf in the world. And then in September of 2012, a few months before I got there actually, somebody in Congress highlighted the word wolf on the endangered species list, and then they hit the delete key. The next time those wolves put a paw outside of a non-existent boundary of Yellowstone Park, the brother of the breeding male was shot right away. They all fled back into the park. They went out a few weeks later to the same spot, maybe looking for him. The mother got shot. The mother, who was the most famous wolf in the world, got her own obituary in the New York Times. And then something happened to this very cohesive pack that was known so well. What happened was that all the young ones immediately descended into sibling rivalry. There was a breakdown of order. There was a lot of fighting. Those two dark wolves are kicking out the most precocious of the siblings. They're ganging up on her and they're kicking her out. She tried for several days to come back in. I watched this. They kept beating her up. Finally, she had to leave. I thought, well, she'll probably be okay because she's a young female. Probably the next year she would be leaving on her own anyway, and she'll probably do fine. That's the father. That's the breeding male. He had just lost his entire family because he lost his territory where he hunts. He lost his hunting support. He lost his mate and his brother. He lost everything a wolf can lose. And he, by that time, was kind of old. He was 6 years old, which for a Yellowstone wolf is definitely over the hill. And I thought, she'll be fine and he's doomed. And then what happened was, a few months later, she was shot starving at a chicken coop outside the park. And 3 years later, after surviving God knows how, he found a new mate, established a new territory, and had pups again. He's now about the oldest living wolf in Yellowstone Park. The point of that whole story is they have lives. They're not just numbers. They're not just interchangeable things. And when something bad happens to one of them, it changes the trajectories of the futures of all of the survivors. Sometimes one wolf getting shot is worse for the ones that live than for the one who has been killed. We cause them so much pain that one of the things that I find surprising is, why don't they hurt us more than they do? That killer whale has just finished eating part of a gray whale that he and his companions had killed, and yet those people in that little boat have nothing to fear because no free-living killer whale has ever hurt a human being. That guy, his name is T20, I watched him pull a seal into 3 pieces with 2 of his friends. And when that little boat came around the corner, they stopped to take pictures of him because no free-living killer whale has ever hurt anybody. The seal he just ate was about the size of each of those people in that boat. Why do they eat seals? Why don't they eat us? Why can we trust them around our toddlers? And why no grudge? Two different scientists in 2 different countries have a very similar story about what happened to them, and I'll tell you one of them. They were following a group of killer whales that was acting a little evasive, like they didn't feel like being followed. And then the whales went into a big bank of fog, and the boat went into a big bank of fog, and they couldn't see them anymore, and they said, well, I guess we're done. Let's put our stuff away and try to figure out where home is. This is before GPSs and before Loran. So they just looked at the compass and they put the throttle forward, and in about a minute, all the killer whales were back in front of the boat. These whales that had been evasive were back in front of the boat. So they said, hey, let's see where the whales want to go. We're trying to follow them, let's follow them. They followed them for about 15 miles, and when the fog broke open, the researcher's house was right over there on the shoreline. And then the whales turned around and left. What does that tell us? I don't know. I find it really very mysterious. I think one thing it does tell us is that there's a lot going on in the minds that share planet Earth than anything that we, with our minds that we're so proud of, have ever considered. In the Bahamas, there's a woman named Denise Herzing, and she studies these spotted dolphins, and she studied them for 30 years. She knows who is related to who is whose baby, who is whose mom, who belongs in what group. She knows them. They know her. When she comes, she says it's like a reunion of friends. They take a boat over there. They stay for about a week at a time, and then they're gone for a while, and then they come back. And she says they're always excited. They come around, and they come jumping around and bow riding and everything else. They also do smart things, like once when in a storm the anchor line broke, one of the dolphins kept swimming around where the anchor was until they could come back under motor and send a diver down and get their anchor. So they're pretty smart, and one day she shows up and the dolphins won't come near the boat. She can see the dolphins and they won't come near the boat. One of the dolphins starts to come near and he shoots away. And she's saying, "What is wrong with the dolphins today?" And at that point, somebody comes up from below announcing that someone who had taken a nap in their bunk had died. He had died during a nap in his bunk. Now, how would the dolphins possibly know that one of the human hearts had just stopped? And why would they care about that? And why would that spook them? In an aquarium in South Africa, there was a little baby bottlenose dolphin, and her name was Dolly, and she was an infant, and she was still nursing. And one day, a keeper was on a break, and he was outside the tank looking through a window at the dolphins, and Dolly and her mother and whoever else was in there, and he was smoking a cigarette. And Dolly, the little nursing baby bottlenose, came over to the window and looked at him. And then she just went back to her mother and started nursing again. And then she came back to him, and she released all the milk, which enveloped her head like a cloud of smoke. An infant nursing bottlenose dolphin had an idea: I'm going to use milk to represent whatever that guy is doing. When humans use one thing to represent something else, we call that art. The things that make us human are not the things that we think are the things that make us human. Everything that I see in human beings, I see some of in some other animals. But I think the thing that makes us human is that we are the extreme animal. We are the most compassionate and the cruelest and the most creative and by far the most destructive animal that has ever lived. On this planet, anyway. Love is not the thing that makes us human. It's not unique to us. We're not the only ones who care about our mates. We're not the only ones who care about our babies. Albatrosses live on the most remote islands in the biggest oceans of the world. The parents go out on foraging trips, sometimes for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, sometimes for 5,000 to 10,000 miles round trip, and then come back and give one gigantic meal to a chick that is waiting for them. Now, this is passing life from one generation to the next. This is the chain of being. If something goes wrong with this, it stops. After millions of years, it's all over. And even though these guys are on an island that is as far from a continent as any other island in the world, that's what it looks like there. We don't know about them, we don't think about them, but they sure know about us. And into that sacred relationship, that sacred chain of life, after all of that work, they come back and they feed their chicks things like this plastic screw top to a peanut butter jar. Because it smells like food. They don't all die. They pretty much all have plastic in them now. There's one albatross who is about 65 years old, still breeding, She was hatched in an ocean that had no plastic. She's still alive. That's how fast it has changed. As I said, they don't all die. It's not good for them, but sometimes they do die. Like this one, 6 months old, ready to fledge, died, packed with red cigarette lighters. Now, this is not the relationship we are supposed to have with the rest of the living world. But this isn't just me saying so. This is reality. It is the relationship we do have, because we name ourselves after our minds, and we don't use those minds to think about the consequences or who else we are here on earth with. But when we welcome new human life to the world, we paint animals on the nursery room walls. We don't paint cell phones and we don't paint work cubicles. We paint animals. And I think that we often almost don't really realize why it is that it's animals we're choosing. I think it's because we have a wish for our unborn children who are coming. The wish is, welcome to this beautiful world. We're not alone, we have company. But every animal you will see depicted in every painting of Noah's Ark, deemed worthy of salvation by the Creator, is in mortal danger now, and their flood is us. So, we started with a question, do they love us? And we're going to end by inverting that question a little bit and asking, do we have enough of these things we have to simply let them continue to exist? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Pretty awesome, eh? So Carl has very generously said that he would entertain a few questions. I know that also a number of you would like to have him sign your books. But we will entertain a few questions. So if you'd raise your hand, we'll...
Not just answer, but entertain.
Yes. Yes. There's a microphone coming. Please don't grab the mic. Our staff will hold the mic.
Okay. I have a dog, and I've made a list of the words that I think he knows. Do animals understand words? And then I wonder, do they think in words that I've used or that they know?
Well, they certainly understand words that you've used because they clearly understand them. Some people have told me they've adopted dogs and the dog, was an adult dog, didn't understand anything, and then they found out that it was from Mexico and it understood Spanish. They started speaking in Spanish, and it knew sit and stay and come and go in Spanish. Okay, so they do understand words. I don't think they think in words because I think all of us, if you pay enough attention to how you think, usually feelings and images come to you before you slap words on them. Words are very useful in a lot of ways, and they help us think through complicated things. But when you come home, you don't say, oh, my refrigerator, oh, my spouse, oh, I'm going to now sit down on the couch. You see all these things and you just intuitively do it. Then maybe you have words that come. So I think that's how other animals probably do think. Yes? I'm not sure who's calling the questioners. Is that up to me? There's a microphone headed over to you.
Hey, I'm just a little ignorant on why we would call them killer whales instead of orcas, because killer whales might scare us and be derogatory in some way. So I'm just wondering about the use of the different words.
Well, there's two reasons why I don't call them orcas too much. So a lot of people stopped calling them killer whales. They call them orcas because they think killer whales is not a nice name for them. And that's kind of true. But the issue is that orca basically means demon from the underworld. I'd rather be known as Killer Carl than demon from the underworld. And the second thing is that even though different species of them have not been formally described yet, there's probably about 8 different species of killer whales. And the genus is Orcinus, and the species name is Orca. So as soon as they start describing new ones, it's going to be Orcinus something or other, Orcinus some other thing or other, Orcinus some. There's going to be one left with the name Orca. And then it'll be really confusing calling things that are not called Orca in Latin, Orca in English. And I kind of like not cringing from the fact that they are killer whales. I mean, you know, things that happen in nature aren't always the nicest things that we would like to have happen in nature. This past week in Monterey Bay, there's about 20 killer whales ambushing gray whales coming through with their calves. That's what they eat. Other killer whales don't eat mammals at all. They only eat fish. A weird thing is that the fish-eating ones never kill mammals. The mammal-eating ones won't touch fish. So the other thing is all the researchers call them killer whales, and I hang out with researchers when I write about them, so I'm just kind of accustomed to calling them killer whales. I have no objections to calling them orcas, but those are my reasons. Yes?
I'm going to get it back to domestic animals because we can sort of relate to that. But, you know, I've often heard that dogs are in the moment. So how do you explain, is it sense, smell, touch, that they have memory?
Because they're not always just in the moment, because they do have memories, and they do have a sense of elapsed time, and they do have thoughts about what they want to do next. They have to figure out that I mean, it's a little difficult with dogs because they're in our framework and under our control, and they're pretty simplified from what they really are, which is wolves. The wolves have to decide at some point, now we're going to go hunting, now we're going to sleep for 6 hours, now we're going to go up that mountain or down that valley. They make decisions, and those decisions have to do with the future. They're not long in the future. They probably don't think about what they're going to do 2 or 3 days from now, but they do think about what they're going to do next. And I have 2 dogs. I've been reading a few things about dogs don't have any sense of time and they act the same way no matter how much time has elapsed since you've been. But my 2 dogs are rather different in temperament. One of them acts the same if I've been gone for a few hours or a couple of days or a month. The other one doesn't. The other one, if I'm gone for a few hours, she says, hey, how are you? Welcome home. If I've been gone for a month, she goes completely nuts and she won't leave. And she's smiling for the next 2 hours, and she just wants to be on the couch with me. And it's very clear that she has a better sense of elapsed time than he does, or at least she's much more demonstrative about it. I think also that human beings don't have as much of a sense of time as we tend to think, because we are modern humans in a modern world with all our technology, including things like calendars. Probably most animals have a sense of circularity. The day goes around in circles, the season goes around in circles, and probably most people who are tribal people living as hunter-gatherers have or had exactly that same sense of time. Not enough game here, let's move the camp. At this time of the year, we gather into the winter camp. I don't think they were thinking about where they were going to apply for grad school. Those are new things that we've invented and added on to the way our minds really work.
If we had a sense of time, we would not be dealing with climate change. But the problem is that humans have a very hard time thinking long enough to understand what really will happen.
That's true too.
Okay, we'll take one more. Julie? Or Alexis?
Is this going to be a friendly question, or are we going to get into some kind of a...
No, it's a friendly question.
I'm looking for action here.
Well, it's a good action question.
Okay.
I want to know what you think are the best ways that ordinary people, like the people in this audience, can act to help animals, aside from giving money to welfare organizations and that kind of thing. What other ways?
The thing is, nobody can do everything. Everybody can do something. Nobody can be perfect. Everybody can be better. And there are a lot of ways. I don't know you well enough to know what you can do. I don't know, sometimes people, like, maybe they're thinking about going back to school and changing careers. Maybe they're a billionaire and they can write a giant check. I don't know. It's up to you to figure out what it is you can do, but there are a lot of different things that we all can do. A lot of people are hesitant or hold back or just don't deal with it because they think it doesn't matter. If you think it doesn't matter, you totally don't matter. If you think it matters, you'll start finding ways to matter a little bit, and you'll start finding things to do. Other people are afraid it's not enough. It's not perfect. You know, I can't be vegan. Vegan would be perfect, but I can't be vegan. Okay, well, maybe you don't have to have a hamburger every time you have lunch and every time you have dinner. Sometimes people talk about meatless Mondays, as if that's such a sacrifice that one day a week you would have a healthy food, a healthy meal. But there, you have to scale it to what you're capable of doing and what you want to do and what you can handle. But I will tell you, you can do something. You just have to figure out what it is, because there's plenty to do.
I think your question is the most important one of all. We all just need to be thinking about this and doing our best. Let's give another round of applause to Carl.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you again.
Thank you.